From late-night takeout boxes in Manhattan, to Chinese food scenes in Hollywood movies, to cafeteria menus inside the Pentagon. At this very moment, countless Americans are biting into something. Crispy, hot, deep-fried chicken coated in a thick, glossy, sweet glaze. And many of them will sincerely tell you, this is Chinese food. But if you actually serve this dish in China, things would start to get a little absurd. The first reaction from many Chinese people would probably be, what is this? After all, the fact that a 19th century Hunan military commander somehow ended up as a sweet and spicy fried chicken combo in an American mall is already a little ridiculous. But what is even more ridiculous is that it worked, and it worked remarkably well. What makes this story interesting is not simply that a dish changed its flavor. It's this: why did a group of Chinese immigrants who crossed the Pacific end up creating a Chinese dish that even many Chinese people barely recognize? And why do Americans love it so much? General Tso was a real historical figure. He was one of the most famous military commanders of the late Qing dynasty, a national hero known for suppressing rebellions and helping recover lost territory. Simply put, if there had been a China Tough Guys ranking in the 19th century, General Tso would probably have ranked near the top. So logically, a dish called General Tso's chicken sounds like it should be something pretty tough and serious. But when it arrives at the table, it turns out to be a plate of crispy fried chicken covered in a thick, sweet sauce, often with a few pieces of broccoli on the side. If General Tso himself could see this, he would probably stay silent for quite a while. Back in his home province of Hunan, many people have a similar reaction. The first time they see this dish, what exactly is this? How did a dish that barely resembles Hunan cuisine end up becoming one of the most famous Chinese dishes in America? To find the answer, we have to travel from a New York takeout box all the way back to Taipei in the 1950s. That year, Admiral Arthur Radford, commander of the US Pacific Fleet, visited Taiwan. The banquet chef, a Hunan-born cook named Peng Chang-kuei, improvised a spicy chicken dish: chicken legs, chilies, garlic, and ginger, all stir-fried in hot oil. Radford was impressed. After finishing the meal, he casually asked, "What is this dish called?" Peng borrowed the name of a famous figure from his hometown, General Tso, and that was the beginning of what would later become General Tso's chicken. But back then, General Tso's chicken was nothing like the version we know today. It wasn't sweet, there was no thick glossy sauce, and there was definitely no broccoli. It was a dry stir-fry, heavy on oil and heavy on heat, without that thick layer of batter that now coats the chicken like armor. Only later, after crossing the Pacific and arriving in America, did things begin to change. In the 1970s, Peng brought General Tso's chicken to New York, but a problem quickly appeared. Many American customers weren't used to that direct, intense heat, so little by little, the dish began to change itself. More sugar, thicker sauce, more batter, and crispier fried chicken. When you opened the takeout box, the first thing that rushed out was the steam. Then came the sweetness. Even broccoli, which had never been part of the original dish, slowly found its way onto the plate. With each adjustment, General Tso's chicken moved further away from its Hunan roots. But because of those changes, it survived. And not only did it survive, it thrived. What began as a regional dish slowly became one of the most recognizable Chinese dishes in America. It may be called Chinese food, but in many ways, it tastes like things Americans already know and love. Fried chicken, sugar, salt, and just a little heat. Compared with the fiery flavors of Hunan cuisine, mainstream American tastes have traditionally been more familiar with sweetness and fried foods. And General Tso's chicken happened to combine both. It was almost a recipe for success. Today, many Americans feel like Chinese food has always been popular, but a little more than a century ago, that was far from the case. Many of the earliest Chinese immigrants to America were poor. They built railroads, worked in mines, and ran laundries because many other professions were simply close to them. As a result, the kitchen gradually became one of the few places where many Chinese immigrants could make a living. But another problem soon appeared. Many of the traditional dishes they brought with them felt unfamiliar to American customers and sometimes even intimidating. Whole fish, meat still attached to the bone, chicken feet, pig ears. For many Americans seeing these foods for the first time, the expression on their faces looked less like someone ordering dinner and more like someone facing a survival challenge. General Tso's chicken, boneless, coated in batter and built around familiar flavors, gave many Americans a sense of comfort and the familiarity they had rarely felt with Chinese food before. This was no longer an adventure into an unfamiliar culture. It was comfort food. Manners became simpler. Service became faster. Prices became more affordable. For many American families, Chinese food became a convenient and budget-friendly choice. And in that environment, General Tso's chicken entered its period of real expansion. In some ways, General Tso's chicken was no longer a traditional Hunan dish. It had become something new, a dish that grew up in America while carrying a Chinese background. Most customers weren't asking, "Is this authentic?" They were asking, "Does it taste good?" And it had another powerful advantage: consistency. Whether you were in New York, Chicago, or a small town off the highway, the flavor inside the takeout box was usually very similar because it was easy to reproduce. For restaurant owners, the costs were manageable, the process was standardized, and customers kept coming back for more. As a result, General Tso's chicken began appearing on more and more menus. For many Americans, it became their first introduction to Chinese food. Some even began to assume maybe Chinese food is supposed to taste like this. But here's the interesting part. By this point, General Tso's chicken had become increasingly different from the Hunan dish it once resembled. It felt more like something new, something that had grown inside New York's deep fryers. The people most familiar with it were Americans. And eventually, many Americans discovered something surprising. The Chinese dish they had grown up with wasn't actually eaten very much in China. The feeling is a bit like discovering that fortune cookies didn't really come from China, or that spaghetti and meatballs isn't Italy's national dish. And the story becomes even stranger. In the 1990s, Peng Chang-kuei actually brought General Tso's chicken back to Hunan. The response was surprisingly lukewarm. For many people in Hunan, the dish had become far too sweet. Some even said, "This doesn't taste like Hunan cuisine at all." And so, General Tso's chicken entered a very unusual state. In America, it was a symbol of Chinese food, but in China, many people had never even seen it. Does it belong to Chinese cuisine? In some way, yes. After all, it was created by Chinese chefs. But it doesn't belong entirely to China either, because the place that truly raised it was America. And perhaps that is what makes General Tso's chicken so fascinating. It is like a child who grew up overseas. The name is still Chinese, but the accent has changed. And it no longer needs to prove whether it is authentic, because it has become something else entirely, a living piece of history. Today, in countless Chinese restaurants across America, General Tso's chicken is still being served every day. Many Americans don't realize that this dish is actually uncommon in China. But at this point, that hardly matters anymore, because what it left behind was never just a flavor. It tells the story of a generation of Chinese immigrants learning how to survive, adapt, and put down roots in a foreign land. The debate over whether it is truly authentic still continues today, but General Tso's chicken has already become an answer of its own. One dish crossing an ocean, one flavor connecting two cultures. And the beginning of all those changes came from a very simple desire to find a place to stand and build a life far from home.